Florida's Space Coast, this is your career.
Welcome to the program. I'm Debbie Featherston, your host, and with me tonight is Karla Roberts. She is the president and owner of Motive Learning. Karla, thank you for making time in your busy schedule to come and talk to us about careers in instructional design.
Well, thank you for having me. I think this is a wonderful show to share different industries.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know, I have always wanted to do a program on instructional design because I figure most people probably just don't really know what that is.
That is a very true statement. I can pretty much tell you that I don't think there's many people that go to school to become an instructional designer.
Right.
Maybe there's a few of them, but from my experience, you come from another world. So like from my world, I actually came from video production. But I really always loved education. I always wanted to build content, so it was the perfect fit for me. When I got out of television, it was a great corporate job to go and get. So because I could still build videos, I started building interactive media, and then I could use my skills to build instruction.
What a great fit. You know, I'm kind of curious about, you know, how you started back when you were quite young, as I recall. You were telling me about how you started with NBC. Right,
Yes.
and
I was very lucky to have a father already in the field. So I got a job actually at 15, and I like to tell this story because you never know where your career is going to go. That's the one thing. They always say you have at least 3 careers. I think I've already had 5. But with this one, I started out. I actually was back in the day. They had a role called a copy girl. So when the shuttles were being launched in the 1980s, I actually got hired to run copy for the writers of the NBC news shows.
Wow.
When they were here at the Cape. But the funniest thing is that I actually worked literally in a bathroom of a mobile home. So they had set me up inside the bathroom. The toilet was actually just covered, but actually back then they had the AP devices, the UPI, where actually the copy was being churned out by those reporters. And then I would rip the copy off, and then I would run that to the writers, and then they would make their own stories off of it.
Fantastic.
So I always figured I started at the bottom because I literally worked in a bathroom on my first job.
That's a great way to look at it. So, you know, when you think about your career, and the typical progression that it has taken. Has your career progressed in a logical, or not a logical, but more of a typical fashion that others who might be interested in instructional design might?
It could have. At first I used to think that I was really not typical, that I started in video production, but as I started talking with more and more people, I found out there was a lot of video producers that became instructional designers. Another field that most people think about is technical writing. So people that had gone to colleges and actually gotten a technical writing degree, they became instructional designers. Because there's really no 4-year degree in it.
Right.
You have to get your master's in instructional design. So when actually I transitioned from video production into interactive media developer and became an instructional designer, I then actually decided, hey, I want to find out what I'm building. Is it really working? So I wanted to learn more about adult learning theory. So I went to the University of Central Florida and I got my master's in instructional systems design. So I found a lot of people in that program came from other areas.
Excellent. You know, give me a little bit of a perspective when you get a project, right? Just trying to help the viewers who might have an interest, or we've piqued their interest now.
Okay.
So when you get a project and it's all about designing some courseware, right? Who are some of the people? What are some of the positions or the roles that may be serving on that project to help you? I mean, I'm thinking...
Right. There's a lot, actually.
Yeah, I would think.
Right, so when we put a team together to create a project, there's always a project manager. That is actually very important because you're talking about a collaborative team that has graphic designers, instructional designers, of course, interactive media developers, and even maybe some web application specialists.
Okay.
So depending on how you're deploying or delivering your training, because if you deliver it in a game format or a mobile-friendly game, again, you're going to have maybe some back-end database programmers as well as web application developers. So there really is a wide breadth of people that work on a team. So the instructional designer, though, is really the person who, it's a great name, designs the instruction, right?
Okay, right.
So it's pretty simple to remember. So you do that, and that person will actually design the product, and then they work with the graphic designers. They work with the subject matter experts. That may be the biggest thing, that when we talk about instructional design, I don't have to be an expert on the content that I'm building. I'm actually an expert on designing instruction. So really, how do you build in retrieval exercises, or how do you assess someone on the content? That's what I'm an expert on. But I have done courses on IT topics. I've done courses on aviation, on de-icing of aircraft, defueling or fueling of aircraft. So you can be of anything, and that's why I love this job, actually.
Right.
Is because every day is a different subject matter. So I was one of those people that I liked going to school because I like learning. So I just love the field because I get to learn all the time. But again, you don't have to know the subject to be an instructional designer. You just have to know the right questions to ask and to work with a subject matter expert so that you can build the instruction that actually meets the objectives.
So you get skill sets then that are going to be important. I would imagine critical thinking, you know, communication, oral, written, you know, other skill sets that pop in that come to mind.
Well, there is nowadays. In the beginning days, it really was more of for writers. It was someone who was a technical writer, or somebody had that skill set, so that they could actually, as they're designing the product, they would actually write the content that was in the product as well. Now the industry is really going to where you're actually an authorer as well. So you are building the interactive media. If it's going to be a CBT, if it's going to be a job aid, you're going to be writing it and probably designing and formatting it. So depending on really what the end goal is or what the product is, you will bring in other skill sets now. So I would say in the last 20 years, that's the difference, is that now an instructional designer should be almost like should do multiple jobs.
Right, because the delivery format, right, could be quite varied, as you've just said. It could be computer-based training. It could be still instructor-led.
Right.
It could be virtual.
True.
Right?
Webinars and such.
E-learning courses, right?
And now, we love YouTube, right?
Oh, definitely.
Because when YouTube, and that's how everybody learns nowadays, right? So again, going back to my core, my initial was I got my degree in radio television. And so that was really where I started, was video production. Now, it's come full circle because with YouTube, that's what everybody wants. They want the short videos. That's how a lot of people get their instruction nowadays. So that's what I love. What we do is that a lot of the things that we build, we actually do have videos involved as well. And it really is the quickest, easiest way to train somebody, because they get to see it, they can hear the information, and then they can actually basically perform the operations themselves.
Yeah, and be curious to know what percentage of the population learns more. They're auditory learners, visual learners, versus kinesthetic. You know,
it's true. It's a good one. One of the theories that I always talk about, this is the one I have in my back pocket, is dual coding. And what that means is that you should give it to a person the instruction, like audio, as well as visually, but either text-based. And what that means is that if you receive the information in two different manners, it's also going to burn into your brain two different ways. So you actually have a better chance of recalling it.
I've not heard that term before, and I've been in learning and development for a long time, but I've never heard that.
It was a study out of the UK.
Okay, okay, very interesting. So what is kind of, when you think about some of the trends or changes, I mean, when you go back to the copy girl role, right? And technology has influenced that industry, right? Well, it's influenced the work that you do as an instructional design, right?
That's a great point, actually, because again, now we're talking back in the 90s. I mean, interactive media was available, but it was delivered on CD-ROM. And before that, it was delivered on Laserdisc. And before that, it was just film. I mean, actually, as you know, educational technology, it really started from the World War II when they were trying to train the soldiers faster.
Exactly right.
So it comes all the way back to the 40s, but nowadays, it's the internet. So as an instructional designer, you really should understand the internet. You should understand file formats. You should understand for streaming video, bit rates, compression, everything about that. So again, it's one of those things that you can, you'd be a specialist maybe in one area, but then as you keep getting deeper and deeper into the career, you're going to want to expand and expand.
Yeah.
Because you need to have the answers for everything, and then they're changing all the time too.
Right. That's always a curious point, because I think that so many times when a person's in a profession, they're nose down, really doing the work and focused on what's in the present, right? They're focused on the present. But sometimes we begin to lose sight of where are we going. I think it would be hard for somebody in your line of work, though, to not see the present or the future, or have a sense of the future, because technology is so prevalent in what you do.
And I can use a great example for that. When we created courseware, and we've been doing it for over 10 years, we used an HTML structure. Okay, this is getting a little technical, but we used an HTML structure that used maybe some Flash assets. Have you heard of, of Adobe Flash?
Oh, sure. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
So Adobe Flash is something that allows for animation, interactivity, and such. Well, guess what? Adobe Flash is not going to be available any longer. So it's something that you have to be watching for and seeing. So what we did way ahead of time was we didn't build courses in Flash. We built them in tried and true HTML.
Okay.
But now HTML5, which was adopted in 2014, is actually the new HTML5, the HTML.
Right,
and
right.
it is different than HTML4. So there are actually talking about some problems in the industry that we're having, is that courses that were built years ago no longer play.
Oh.
So it's something to be aware of, but the interesting thing about ours is that our courses are still playing. We have clients that built courses 10 years ago and they're still using them. But it's because we had that forward-thinking idea that we didn't want to be locked into a plug-in such as Flash to create courses that could go away at any second.
Good foresight, and
you.
now we see that the rate of change is more hastened, I think, when it comes to technological advancements, right?
Right, and the browsers, like in my industry, the browsers are always changing, so that you can never know what's going to really happen there.
So somebody that's moving into instructional design, there's a number of skill sets, and there's a huge body of knowledge around that involves technology, software, different systems.
Yes. Yeah, the nice thing about it, though, is that I'm talking a lot of technical stuff here because I've been in this industry a long time, and because we did make the choices that we made. But as an instructional designer, you actually can use authoring tools. There's a tool called Adobe Captivate, and so that is something that actually builds interactive media training, as well as another tool called Articulate Storyline.
Okay, I've heard of both of those. I'm amazed.
They're big tools. They're big tools. So, and they're really easy to use. Now, I say that they are easy to use, but it takes time to get acclimated to it, because it's like any software. If you opened up Word for the first time,
Right.
would you know how to use it?
I remember not knowing how to use it.
Right. I remember the days when you literally typed in WordPerfect the codes,
That's it.
So, it's for anybody. You can learn it. It's very easy to learn. It's really fun to learn. There's a community that's the one thing that I like Articulate over Captivate, is that one, I think it's a better product, but two, they even have a community site called eLearning Heroes. And it's just people that are sharing all their knowledge of how they did something, or maybe an idea, or like how did they do scenario-based training, or maybe a game that they implemented to help for people to recall information. So again, there's a whole community out there of instructional designers that we're people that like to share knowledge. We love education, so we do it very well.
Absolutely, and I love the fact that it's a community where you're sharing, because you can always grow, and with all the advancements and the changes, whether it's the LMSs impact what you do, don't they? The learning management systems.
They do, actually. So we create courses for any LMS, but there is a standard called SCORM, and there's another standard called AICC. So we create our courses to be compliant or conformant with those standards. So that allows anybody, actually the government, going back to the educational technology, you got to love the U.S. government, because they put a lot of money that help industries. Because one of the things that they did is they actually put money into the standard and formulating it so that as a company, you could come to me as Mode of Learning. I could create a course and place it in your LMS. But if you moved LMSs, if I did it for another company, they would all work together. Because before that happened, you would create something proprietary, and then you couldn't move it to another system.
That's what I was remembering, is years ago when we got involved in some of these things, that there was big struggles because there was a lack of compatibility. So that's nice to see.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've worked hard on that, and so again, so most people do output in those standards, so there shouldn't be any problems.
You know, within the world of instructional design, we've talked about a couple different roles, the instructional designer. What would you say would be some differences in the role of just a developer? So if I carve out just that little niche of developer versus a graphic artist versus an editor.
I love it. I love it. So the instructional designer usually creates the storyboard. So again, they design the content, they design the interactions, they design what the course is going to look like from the content side. The developer receives that storyboard. And so they look at the storyboard and say now they're using an authoring tool or they're programming it just straight with HTML and JavaScript, and they actually just build the course based off what the instructional designer built. Now what I was saying earlier was that some of that role is getting mixed, so that a lot of instructional designers are having to do the development as well. But if you work for a big production house, it's actually going to be separate.
Okay.
If you're working for a larger corporation that has a big training and development team, it'll probably be separate as well. But a lot of companies, they have it as one role, so that you end up having to do all the development. And then what is included in development, the fun programming side, which some people don't think is so much fun, but, but the fun programming side, I love it, but is graphic design.
Okay.
Because you want your product to look pretty.
Right.
And I say that in a way, but it really is true, because if your product is engaging, it's one of the things that I teach in graphic design. If your product is basically pleasant looking and done by design rules, then it's going to be more engaging.
Yeah.
It's not just what we think of when we talk about engagement. A lot of times in instruction of, oh, did it like grab my attention?
Right.
Did I have a great video to open up with? Do I do a game? I mean, those are all fun, engaging tools. But actually, graphic design is one of them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think that that would be a fundamental one. So, yeah.
Yeah, it has to look good for people to want to read it.
Right.
And spend their time in the product.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that makes plenty of sense for me, to me. So the editor just scales back, very small role and scope in terms of just looking at the content at different points to make certain that there's continuity, punctuation graphics, there's no gaps.
Yes.
Transitions are smooth, that kind of thing?
That's a good point. So usually, like again, at the larger production houses,
Yeah.
you would have an editor as well.
Yeah.
So somebody that the instructional designer works with to help make sure that the consistency is there. And they probably, hopefully, have a style guide. So usually, per client, you would actually produce a style guide that will say, okay, we want the name always in capital letters. We want, and you know how it is. Some people use serial commas,
right,
and then they put a comma and some people don't like that.
Right.
So there are rules that you have to understand that your client wants before you even get started. And the editor looks for those things, as well as grammar. And I think the biggest thing that, one thing that people probably don't think about is just quality control. Because it's along the lines of editing, or as an editor, but also on the back end. Now you've got, after the instructional designer gets the storyboard approved, now you've got a programmer, you've got a graphic designer that maybe is creating graphics with text in it. You've got all kinds of people touching this product, so you really need a good quality control process at the end. Because graphic designers are maybe not known for being good editors,
looking at the visual, it's the creative side, right? So that makes sense to me that they would not, you can't be creative and logical at the same time.
Right and left brain,
That's
it's hard to find.
Very
but it's not putting, and I don't mean it to come across that we're putting that industry down, it's just kind of the nature. And then as well as the fact that the things happen. Typos happen.
Right.
You need to make sure that things are linking to each other, like if you're testing the interactive program or like you would a website or something like that. But also the fact that, when I was in that role as just a developer, because I would get hired as just a developer sometimes, not as the instructional designer. I would work with instructional designers. But at that stage, you're not thinking about the content. We're going back to, you're thinking about the layout. You're thinking about where things are placed. You're thinking about the functionality. You're not thinking about the, is it capitalized or not?
Right.
So that would be one of the things that as a developer, I would really work with the instructional designer and say, okay, I'm going to take your storyboard as is at this stage. So make sure it's good. Make sure it's good.
Okay. An added thing that I think about, and I've been dealing with some in some large global projects that we've been involved in, is where you take a product, right, whatever course has been developed, and then you translate it into a variety of languages.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Have you had a lot of experience, or what? Let me ask it this way. What advice would you give, or what considerations might someone who's involved in this team have to think about when they're translating it from English to maybe 10 or 20 different languages?
It's a very good question, because with the global economy, and we do have global clients, so
Yeah.
one, you have, and it's a hard call. Like, I have a couple of clients in the UK. Well, they spell things differently.
Yes, they do.
And they speak English too,
Yes.
but they do spell things differently.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to, going back to that style guide that I mentioned, you need to
Right.
make those decisions up front.
Mm-hmm.
How are things going to be? It seems silly, but how are things going to be spelled if you're looking at a global entity, such as some of the companies I work with?
Yeah.
And then we have done some projects where we've translated to other languages. Now, what we've always done is create for English.
Right.
And then we translate it.
Exactly, and that's
Yeah.
what this is too. So you start with English, but what struck me was, when you're putting together the facilitator guides, assuming that you're putting together a train the trainer, is that the language has to be pretty simple and straightforward. So when it gets translated, that it really translates well. That was one of the things that I was thinking about, and I figured in the development or the design there may be other points that you had thought about, as you mentioned.
Well, I will tell you what I've built into my work process is I've worked with many translation houses, and you used to tell them Latin American Spanish,
Yes.
or you would kind of,
Right.
now they just really do Spanish.
Yeah.
What I have done is that I usually find somebody at the customer site that maybe speaks Spanish, and then I ask for them to review the content after it's been
Right.
translated, because there are cultural differences. There are, just depending on who did the translation. So I
Yeah.
kind of do that double check.
That's
and
great.
that has worked well for us.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've seen that. I'm not involved in that phase, but I have certainly seen that, where that's what they like to do, is to find somebody that's local, right, that's within the company, that can look at it and make some points. So.
Right, and I can tell you a short little story. I was over in the UK, and we were broken down. And I have to tell you, I was not happy. I was not happy.
I think so.
But I'm on the phone. I'm calling the 911. It's a different number over there, but I'm calling them, and I kept telling them that I'm on the freeway. I really don't know where I am, but I'm on the freeway. The entire conversation, by the time that the policemen came out to help us, they actually informed me that they had no idea what I was talking about, because they don't use that term. They use carriageway. So when I kept saying that I was on the freeway and I'm here, they had no idea what I was talking about. Thank God they found us.
Yes.
Because it was late at night and it was getting really scary when you're in another country. But it really drove the point home that you really do need to understand the terms.
Right. Because you got to make certain it translates well, right?
Exactly. So they understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the remaining minutes, I'm just curious, what industries might someone who's interested in instructional design, or many of the different roles that would fit within that and support instructional design, what are some of the industries where they might work?
Oh, well, we've found ourselves in aviation and aerospace. That's a huge industry for training and instructional design. Again, I mentioned IT because, of course, when you're developing new products, software companies, they have to provide training for either their resellers, or they have to provide training for their customers. So anybody that really has a product would need instruction for the most part. And then you go into compliance. So now you might just not be talking about your product. You need to build training for safety reasons, for OSHA regulations, for the FAA, for different federal regulatory bodies. So I really don't know of an industry that really wouldn't use an instructional designer. But then there is the fact that there are some companies that are very pro training and development. They want to, of course, develop their talent, and they also want to make sure that their employees are qualified. I love using the story of aviation because a lot of our clients, the employees actually work on aircraft.
Right.
So if you make a mistake or have an accident or an incident, you're talking maybe millions of dollars. So again, when you're in that type of world, training is very important.
Right.
But I really personally believe training is important for every industry.
Sure. Well, I see a lot of growth in leadership development, and I would imagine there's a lot more courses being developed for leaders at different levels within an organization. And so, thinking about large global companies might be, somebody that's interested in this area might find that there's a home for them.
Right. I think the good thing to tell everybody is look for the training and development group.
Yeah, that's what I was
Right?
going to, yeah, absolutely.
So if the company has a training and development group, which some companies don't actually.
Right, that's true.
If they have that group, then you're probably good to go.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be looking for an
training and
instructional
development.
designer.
What would the Association of Training and Development, it's not called Talent Development, the association, used to be ASTD. It is now the Association of Talent Development, ATD. So would they perhaps be a good place? I'm thinking about young people coming out, of college or junior. What about experience? We've got about 30 seconds to a minute left.
Okay.
And I'm just curious, what might be some ways that they could get some practical experience?
Well, associations such as ATD is a very good way of networking and learning about different areas of the industry. I think the best experience is obviously actually doing it.
Sure.
And I think actually even here at Eastern Florida State College, there are fantastic programs in technology.
Yeah.
And actually the projects that you do in those courses will help you build your portfolio, and then you can actually use that when you're going out looking for a job.
And of course, best kept secret is you also teach here.
Yes.
A couple courses, right?
I have. I'm actually teaching web authoring, graphic design, and field production for video.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I've been having a great time here at Eastern Florida State College doing that on top of my business.
Hey, that's awesome, Karla.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and the information.
Thank you.
And on behalf of my guest and everyone here on the set, thank you for watching, and remember, be career happy.
More information about this program is available online at millermediagroup.org.